There's something agonizing about ambiguity, isn't there? That space between certainty and nothingness, where looks linger too long, where words hesitate before they land, where silence carries more weight than it should. And in that space, you often find yourself questioning your own intuition. You wonder if what you felt was real. You replay the moments, the way they laughed a second too long, the way they looked away when your eyes met, the tension you could cut with a knife but couldn't name aloud. Because they never said it. They never told you they cared, but something told you they did. And yet they pull back. You see, the mind is not so easily aligned with the heart. We like to think that if someone feels something for us, they'll say it. That emotion is straightforward, that attraction is linear, that love always shows itself plainly. But that's not the case. People don't always act on their feelings. In fact, the more profound the emotion, the more deeply someone might try to hide it, especially if that emotion threatens the fragile equilibrium they've built in their life. Feelings are inconvenient. They disturb routines, shatter control, dismantle order. They open doors people thought they'd sealed shut for good. So what happens when someone doesn't want to feel what they're feeling? They fight it. And when someone is secretly fighting their feelings for you, they won't always run from you. Sometimes they'll stand right in front of you, talking, smiling, laughing, and still be hiding the storm inside them. That's the paradox. The closer they are, the more they resist. And the signs, they're never obvious. They're tiny, delicate, almost invisible to the untrained eye. But once you know what to look for, you'll start seeing them everywhere. You'll recognize that certain shift in tone, that unspoken pause, that flicker of fear mixed with longing in their eyes. They're not ignoring you, they're defending themselves. Not from you, but from what being near you brings out of them. And why do people fight their feelings? For the same reason we fear heights. Not because we don't know how to climb, but because we're terrified of falling. Love, real love, demands that we risk that fall. It asks us to dismantle our armor, to be seen as we are, to become vulnerable in a world that punishes vulnerability. And that's not easy, especially for people who have spent years mastering emotional detachment, who have intellectualized their pain, or who've buried their capacity for intimacy under layers of self-preservation. When someone like that feels drawn to you, they will resist you first. That resistance is not rejection, it's proof of impact. But what's dangerous about this dynamic is how easy it is to misread. You might mistake their withdrawal for disinterest, their distance for dismissal. I thought they were. And then you begin to doubt yourself. You internalize their confusion. You tell yourself you imagined the connection. You shrink to accommodate the story their actions seem to tell. And in doing so, you start to betray your own intuition. That's the real tragedy. Because the signs are there. They always are. You just need to stop expecting them to be loud. Real feelings, especially ones being fought, rarely show up screaming. They whisper, they hesitate, they contradict themselves, but they do appear. You might see it in how they show up, even when they don't have to, in how they remember the things you didn't expect them to remember, in how they listen more than they speak when you talk about your dreams. You might see it in the awkwardness that wasn't there before, how their confidence shifts into something less sure. When you might see it in their silence when others flirt with you, or in the strange tension they create when they make a joke that doesn't quite land but clearly masks something deeper. These aren't grand gestures. They're micro confessions, fragments of suppressed desire, echoes of a truth that's trying and failing to stay buried. And what makes it all so complex is that they don't even know they're doing it half the time. They don't know they're fighting something sacred, because sacredness is inconvenient. It demands change. And most people don't want to change, not really. They want safety, they want familiarity. But when love enters the equation, especially uninvited, it shatters that safety. So instead of embracing it, they rationalize it away. They hide it beneath sarcasm, they bury it under politeness, they detour around it with distractions. But you can still feel it if you trust yourself enough to see past the facade. This is not about romanticizing emotional unavailability. It's not about waiting for someone to choose you once they figure it out. It's about understanding the depth of human complexity, about learning to discern between someone who feels nothing and someone who feels too much to handle. It's about recognizing that sometimes the person who seems the most indifferent is the one who's fighting the hardest not to fall. And it's about having the strength to observe, not chase, to witness, not absorb, to hold space for the truth while anchoring yourself in your own self-worth. Because the moment you stop begging for clarity and start watching for signs, everything changes. You no longer force answers out of people who can't give them. You simply become still enough to notice the truth they're too scared to speak. And if you can do that, if you can stay grounded while they unravel, then maybe, just maybe, you'll stop seeing their hesitation as rejection and start seeing it for what it really is. Resistance to a feeling. That scares them more than they care to admit. When someone is secretly fighting their feelings for you, their actions rarely come across as indifferent. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The person who is most emotionally conflicted will often appear the most restrained, guarded, even cold, not because they don't feel anything, but because they feel too much. And that intensity, it frightens them. So instead of leaning in, they retreat. Instead of expressing what's alive inside them, they suppress it. They don't act with indifference. They overcompensate with emotional distance. And if you're not attuned to that deeper dynamic, you might assume they simply don't care. But suppression, when done effectively, creates a mask so convincing that even they begin to believe it. This is one of the most deceptive aspects of human behavior. We imagine that emotional suppression is a kind of absence, as if the lack of visible affection is a lack of affection itself. But suppression doesn't mean emptiness. It's a choice, often unconscious, to put a lid on something too powerful to manage. Because when a person has tried to control their environment, their heart, their habits, and then someone walks into their life who disarms all of that with one smile, one conversation, one moment of unexpected vulnerability, they don't always welcome that presence with open arms. They brace themselves. They try to maintain control, to maintain dignity, to keep their emotions on a leash. This is not about playing hard to get. This is about someone trying not to get hurt. They've likely lived through emotional chaos before. Maybe they've had their heart broken. Maybe they've invested in people who didn't return the effort. Maybe they've lost themselves in someone else's narrative and had to rebuild from scratch. So now they've constructed walls, rules, boundaries, not because they're trying to push love away, but because they're trying to protect what's left of themselves. And when someone like you comes along, someone who triggers that old vulnerability in a new way, they don't know whether to run or stay. So they do both in alternating rhythm. One day they're warm, the next they're distant. One moment you're sure, the next you're spinning. That's not cruelty, that's confusion. That's the push and pull of a person caught in the crossfire between desire and defense. Emotional suppression is not a passive experience. It takes energy. It's a constant negotiation between impulse and image, between what the heart wants and what the ego is willing to admit. And sometimes that suppression shows up as sarcasm, sometimes it's formality. Sometimes it's an almost robotic friendliness that seems too polished to be real. But underneath that surface is tension, visible only to those who know how to read it. You see it in the way their hands fidget when they talk to you, in the way they avert their gaze when the moment between you gets too intimate, in the way they say something small, but the weight behind their words is anything but casual. You see it in how often they seek your presence without inviting intimacy. They orbit you, yet deny gravity, and all the while, they're hoping you don't see what's happening beneath the surface. But the truth has a way of revealing itself even when someone is trying their hardest to bury it. And it always finds its way through micro behaviors, things they don't even realize they're doing. Like how they remember details about your life you only mentioned once. Like how they laugh at your jokes a little harder than they should, or how they find excuses to be around you that don't really make sense. And they'll ask about your day, your plans, your dreams, then immediately retreat when the conversation starts to feel too personal. Why? Because their interest is real, but so is their fear. Fear is the root of emotional suppression, not hatred, not indifference. Fear of being seen, fear of being misunderstood, fear of letting someone in only to have them leave. That fear doesn't always wear obvious clothes. It might wear confidence, sarcasm, logic, but underneath that wardrobe is a heart that's trying not to break again. And sometimes love feels like a threat, not because it's dangerous, but because it asks us to be vulnerable in ways we've trained ourselves not to be. When you're on the receiving end of this dynamic, it's easy to misinterpret. You might start questioning your own worth. You might believe that if they really cared, they'd say so. That if they truly had feelings, they wouldn't act so cold. But what you're witnessing isn't rejection. It's resistance. A very human, very fragile attempt to stay in control. Because to confess those feelings would mean opening the floodgates. It would mean stepping into uncertainty, where the outcome can't be predicted, where the self can't remain untouched. And for someone who's built their life around certainty and self-protection, that's terrifying. But just because they're suppressing their emotions doesn't mean they don't exist. In fact, suppression is the strongest confirmation that the feelings are real. Because no one fights what isn't there. No one hides what they don't fear will reveal them. So someone is behaving oddly around you, not ignoring you completely, but not letting you in either. It might be because they're wrestling with something inside that even they don't fully understand yet. And your presence brings it to the surface. This is why patience and self-respect are crucial in situations like this. You can't pull the truth out of someone who isn't ready to own it. You can't force clarity from a heart still at war with itself. What you can do is remain rooted in your own sense of value. You can refuse to absorb their confusion. You can hold space without shrinking. Because the moment you try to chase them into clarity, they will run deeper into suppression. But if you can stay still, truly still, they might find the courage to stop running from what's already chasing them, their own heart. And in that moment of stillness, you'll see it clearly, not in their words, not even in their actions, but in the cracks between both, the subtle tells, the accidental softness, the glance that lingers a little too long. That's where the truth lives, not in the grand gestures. But in the fight, they're quietly losing every time they see you. There's a unique kind of tension that lives in contradiction. It's quiet but constant, subtle yet powerful. And when someone is secretly fighting their feelings for you, contradiction becomes their language. They'll say one thing and do another. They'll initiate conversation only to pull back the moment it becomes too intimate. They'll light up when you enter the room, then act indifferent once you're standing in front of them. It's confusing, even maddening, to be on the receiving end of such behavior. But what you're witnessing isn't manipulation, it's internal conflict. It's someone trying to navigate a storm inside them without letting it show on the surface. That conflict doesn't just play out in what they do, it's embedded in how they do it. The inconsistency is not random, it's a pattern, and patterns always tell stories. You'll notice how they can be deeply attentive in one moment and strangely distant the next. You'll see the emotional seesaw they're trapped in, wanting connection but fearing the consequences of it. This isn't someone playing games, this is someone who's trying to keep their emotions in check but failing at it in ways they don't fully understand. Because when your feelings for someone grow deeper than you intended, it disrupts the framework you built to keep your world stable. And make no mistake, most people build lives that prioritize emotional stability, not emotional honesty. They invest in routines, in certainty, in predictability. So when an unexpected connection begins to form, it threatens that balance. It doesn't matter how much they want you. If their internal world is not prepared for the intensity of what they feel, they'll sabotage it before it even begins. But sabotage won't always be loud or cruel. Often it will be wrapped in politeness, detachment, even friendly gestures that say, "I'm here," while their energy screams, "Don't come any closer." You feel that contradiction in the air between you. It's not rejection, it's restraint. This restraint creates a strange rhythm in your dynamic, one that pushes and pulls, opens and closes. They'll lean into you during moments of emotional openness, then suddenly revert back into themselves, as if intimacy triggered an alarm. You'll find yourself trying to figure out what changed. You'll replay your conversations, trying to see where you went wrong. But the truth is, it's not about what you did, it's about what your presence awakens in them. You see, when you make someone feel something they've been trying to avoid, their first instinct isn't to embrace it, it's to regulate it, to manage it, to minimize the risk. That risk can take many forms. Maybe they're afraid of being vulnerable because they've been hurt in the past. Maybe they fear they're not ready for love or not worthy of it. Maybe the timing is wrong, or they're involved with someone else, or they're too focused on their goals to let anyone in. The reason doesn't change the behavior though. The behavior remains the same, inconsistency, because their emotional and logical selves are not in agreement. One side wants to move forward. The other side is slamming on the brakes. You'll recognize this tension in small moments, like when they tell you they're busy but keep finding reasons to message you, or when they downplay their interest in you, but their body language tells a different story. They'll cross their arms when they talk to you, but lean in ever so slightly. They'll make casual comments that hint at jealousy, then pretend they didn't mean anything by it. They'll give you a compliment only to mask it with a joke. And when you start to feel confused, they'll act as if you're reading too much into things, but you're not. You're seeing through the cracks in their mask. Because the truth always leaks. No matter how strong someone's defenses are, emotion will find a way out. It might be through a glance that lingers too long, a hesitation before they speak, a sudden shift in mood when the topic gets too close to the heart. You'll see it in how their energy changes when you talk about someone else, in how they suddenly get quieter or more animated or strangely competitive. These aren't conscious choices, they're the unconscious symptoms of emotional conflict. And if you're perceptive, you'll catch them. You'll start to notice how their contradictions are actually evidence of something real they're trying to suppress. But this is where your self-awareness becomes crucial. Because when someone is giving you mixed signals, it's tempting to try and decode them constantly, to become a detective in their emotional world. But that effort will drain you if you're not anchored in your own clarity. Their confusion cannot become your confusion. Their silence cannot become your self-doubt. You have to remember that you're not imagining these contradictions. You're witnessing someone who's battling a feeling they didn't plan for. And that battle is not yours to fight for them. What you can do is observe without absorbing. You can acknowledge the push and pull without getting swept into the emotional tide. Because the moment you try to fix their inner conflict by offering more of yourself, you risk losing yourself in the process. You become reactive instead of responsive. And the more you chase clarity, the more they retreat into ambiguity. So the wiser path is to stand still in the storm. Not because you're passive, but because you're grounded. You recognize the difference between affection and availability, between feeling something and being ready for it. And that's the hardest pill to swallow. Someone can deeply care for you and still not be ready to meet you in that space. Their contradictions may not be malicious, but they are still harmful if you internalize them. The behavior may not be intentional, but the effects are real. You have to honor what's consistent, not what's compelling. Words are not enough. Even emotion is not enough. What matters is action, alignment, clarity. And if someone's behavior continues to oscillate, if their presence leaves you more anxious than affirmed, it's not your job to stay and wait for them to sort it out. You deserve consistency. And while it's okay to recognize that someone is struggling with their feelings, it's also okay to protect your peace while they figure themselves out. Sometimes love is there, but it's not yet safe, not yet steady, not yet formed into something you can hold. And that's not your fault. It's simply a reflection of someone who hasn't yet reconciled their emotional truth with their external world. And until they do, all you'll ever get are contradictions, temporary signals of a war they haven't yet won. There's something unspoken that happens when someone is secretly fighting their feelings for you. It shows up in their protectiveness, often in ways they don't even realize. They become subtly territorial, emotionally alert, and intensely aware of your surroundings, especially when other people enter your orbit. It might not be loud or obvious. In fact, the most telling signs are often the quietest. A glance, a sudden shift in mood, a comment disguised as a joke. But beneath it all is a deep emotional charge, one that stems from attachment they won't admit out loud. Because when someone tries to bury their feelings, those feelings don't disappear, they redirect. And one of the clearest redirections is protectiveness. This kind of protectiveness isn't about dominance, it's about presence. It's the way someone instinctively notices when something or someone threatens your comfort, the way they lean in when someone else gets too close, the way they pay attention to your energy, your safety, your needs, often without being asked. These behaviors don't stem from obligation, they stem from care. And care, when denied expression, always finds alternative pathways. One of those pathways is this almost primal urge to ensure you're okay, especially when they can't openly express why that matters so much to them. You'll notice it in how they act around other people who seem interested in you. Suddenly they become more alert, more engaged. Maybe they crack a joke at someone else's expense. Maybe their body language tightens. Maybe they insert themselves into the conversation with an edge that wasn't there before. It's not necessarily aggression, it's proximity control. It's them subconsciously trying to reestablish a boundary that feels violated when someone else crosses a line they wish they could claim, but can't. Not yet. Not while they're still pretending those feelings don't exist. They might even become critical in subtle ways. Not overt insults, but small remarks that carry more weight than they should. Comments about someone you're talking to, questioning their intentions. their character, or their compatibility with you. It'll seem harmless at first, but if you're perceptive, you'll recognize the pattern. Their concern isn't neutral, it's emotionally loaded, and it usually comes with a certain frustration, because while they're criticizing someone else, what they're really doing is projecting their own inability to step up and express what they're actually feeling. This protectiveness doesn't stop with romantic scenarios. It shows up in how they respond when you're upset, when you're overwhelmed, when life hits you hard. They'll be there, not always with words, but with presence. They'll offer help without being asked. They'll check in without making it obvious. They'll notice the subtle changes in your mood, your energy, your voice, and they'll react. Not because they feel responsible for you, but because they feel something about you that won't let them turn away. This is the contradiction of hidden emotion. The person who tells themselves they don't care is often the one who shows up when no one else does. Because when something matters to us, truly matters, we can't detach from it entirely, no matter how much we try. The protective instincts kick in, often against the will of the person experiencing them. They may not want to love you, they may not even want to like you, but if those feelings are there, you'll see it in how they try to keep you safe, physically, emotionally, and even socially. At times, this can create confusion for you. You'll wonder why someone who claims to be uninterested cares so much about what you do, who you're with, or how you're feeling. You'll find yourself questioning whether you're imagining things. You're not. What you're experiencing is real. It's just not being acknowledged by the person who feels it. And that disconnect can be maddening because the behavior speaks louder than the words. You'll start to trust what you see more than what you hear because the actions don't lie. The words might, but the energy doesn't. Sometimes their protectiveness even becomes a form of self-sabotage. They'll push you away, not because they want distance, but because they don't trust themselves not to give in. So they mask their care with coldness. They pretend they're indifferent when in reality they're watching everything, monitoring your reactions, analyzing your choices, comparing themselves to whoever else might be in your life. And all the while they're fighting the urge to just come clean, to say what they really feel. But the fear of vulnerability outweighs the desire for connection. That fear is rooted in control. To express feelings is to risk losing the upper hand. And people who have been hurt, who've experienced betrayal or emotional instability, often prioritize control above connection. Love asks them to give up that control, to be exposed, to be seen without armor. That's terrifying for someone who's spent years protecting themselves. So instead, they offer what they can manage, protectiveness from a distance. It's a compromise their nervous system can handle. I can't tell you I care about you, but I can still act like I do. And that contradiction becomes their reality. This is why it's important to read between the lines, not just listen to what's being said, because sometimes the heart speaks through defense, through care disguised as caution, through distance layered over devotion. You'll know someone is secretly fighting their feelings not by what they confess, but by what they guard. And if their behavior toward you shifts the moment you become vulnerable, or the moment someone else shows interest in you, it's not because they've suddenly developed feelings, it's because those feelings have always been there, just tightly controlled. In the end, protectiveness is one of the most instinctual signs of emotional attachment. It's how people show love when they're not ready to admit they're in it. It's the bridge between affection and action. The unsaid message carried through concern. And while it doesn't always mean someone is ready to be with you, it does mean something inside them already is. They're present, even when they try not to be. They care, even when they won't admit it. And they show up, not for validation, but because a part of them already belongs to you. There's a moment, a quiet, often overlooked moment, when someone who's secretly fighting their feelings for you lets a crack show. It could be a slip in conversation, an expression they don't mask in time, or a silence that lingers longer than it should. That crack isn't accidental. It's a moment when their inner truth leaks out before their conscious mind pulls the curtain back over it. One of the clearest signs of someone struggling with their feelings is emotional transparency that seems out of character. They'll say something deeply personal, then retreat. They'll open up, then act like they never did. These emotional outbursts, as small as they may be, are not meaningless. They're evidence of internal tension trying to find release. A person who's hiding how they feel will often have moments where their guard drops. Maybe it's late at night when they're tired and less able to manage their self-protective walls. Maybe it's after something emotional happens in their life, or yours. Maybe it's in the aftermath of laughter, when their defenses are softened and their real emotions rise to the surface. And in that moment, they say something or express something that's just a little too honest. You notice it, they notice it, but rather than acknowledge it, they shift the subject, or they laugh it off, or they suddenly seem nervous, closed off, or awkward. That's not just shyness. That's emotional recoil. It's what happens when a person says more than brilliance they meant to say, and then scrambles to restore the illusion of distance. You'll often hear them contradict themselves in these moments. One day they'll talk about how they don't want anything serious, and the next they'll share a vision of what kind of life they want to build with someone someday who understands them. And you'll wonder if they realize they just exposed a vulnerable part of themselves. The answer is yes, they do. But they're hoping you didn't notice, or that you'll let it slide. Because admitting it, owning that exposure, would mean acknowledging the very thing they've been trying to deny, that they're emotionally invested. This kind of emotional inconsistency is a psychological balancing act. On one side, they want to be close to you. On the other, they fear what that closeness might mean. So, when the feeling becomes too heavy to hold, it spills out in a way that's almost involuntary. A compliment they didn't mean to say out loud. A sudden moment of defensiveness when you talk about someone else. A quiet but intense stare they think you didn't catch. These aren't just actions, they're reveals. Little glimpses of the truth they're trying so hard to bury. Even more telling is how they handle your vulnerability. When you open up, when you share something raw or deeply personal, watch their reaction. Do they lean in? Not just physically, but emotionally. Do their eyes soften? Do they stop what they're doing and become entirely focused on you? Those reactions are not rehearsed. They're intuitive. Someone who is emotionally invested, even if they're hiding it, will feel your pain as if it's their own. And even if they try to act like it didn't affect them, the emotion stays in the room. It changes the dynamic. It exposes the bond. It's not just your pain either. It's your joy. When you talk about something that excites you, do they light up in response? Do they remember the small details of your stories, bring them up later, or support your aspirations with more passion than a casual friend would? These moments are subtle, but they are emotionally charged. Because someone who is fighting their feelings is still rooting for you, even if they do it from the sidelines. They want to be part of your world, they're just not ready to say it. But sometimes that emotional transparency is more passive. It's in the way they look at you when you're not looking at them. In the way their voice softens when they say your name. In how they linger in conversation, even when there's nothing left to say. They don't need to confess anything because their energy already has. They can try to keep things casual, but the tone betrays them. Their tone changes when they talk to you compared to others. There's more care, more attention, more depth. That's not something they control, that's something they feel. When someone is emotionally transparent despite their attempts to hide it, it means the feeling has grown beyond their ability to suppress it. They can't contain it fully, so it leaks through behavior, word choice, silence, and presence. And here's where it gets complicated. They may not even be aware of just how much they're revealing, because emotional truth often lives beneath conscious awareness. They feel, but they don't fully know. Or they know, but they're terrified to feel it. That fear comes from many places: past heartbreaks, trust issues, self-worth struggles, or fear of timing and consequences. So they live in denial, not because they don't care, but because they do. The feeling scares them. It's bigger than their ability to process it, so they try to hold it back. And when they fail, it shows. You catch the glimpses. You hear the slips. You feel the difference. You know they feel something, even if they're not ready to admit it. What's important is how you respond to that emotional transparency, because it can be tempting to latch on to it, to see it as proof that the connection is real and worth pursuing. And maybe it is, but emotional transparency alone is not enough. It has to be followed by emotional maturity, by ownership, by clarity. If they can't move past the fear and into expression, the connection remains one-sided. You become the only one carrying the weight of what could be, while they remain guarded behind the fear of what might happen if they speak. So yes, their vulnerability means something. Yes, their transparency is real, but it is not your job to wait for them to catch up to it. Because no matter how strong the emotion is, it's meaningless if it never moves into action. Love doesn't live in hesitation, it lives in courage. And until they find the strength to stop hiding, their glimpses of truth will remain just that, glimpses, beautiful, powerful, but ultimately incomplete.